Howdy. Rhett here. What you're about to witness is an attempt to recreate an old American art form for a modern audience. Back in the days before TV, families would gather around the radio, if you can believe that, and they would listen to wholesome entertainment that was generated entirely by theater of the mind. Your ability to imagine is what brought the characters and the story to life. This story was created in the style of old-time radio and stems from my fascination with it. It was a project for a college course, and up until this point, I never really intended it to be anything more than just something for my family to enjoy. The story itself was a bedtime story that I was told as a kid by my mother. However, my mother was also told this story as a kid by her grandmother, so it's just one of those stories that's been passed down through the generations. The story was created entirely by her grandmother. So it's a complete figment of her imagination. All of the characters in the story, as a matter of fact, were inspired by members of her family. And when my mother told the story to me, she created a character just for me. Bedtime was such an exciting experience for me as a kid when I heard these stories. I got lost in the whole storyline, and I looked forward to hearing more. It was an ongoing adventure. As I got a little older, I had a desire to preserve these stories for my kids. But with the passage of time, memory fades, and so I've taken a little poetic license on some of the original story points, but I hope that I've remained true to the original spirit of the story. Now, a few things you need to know. The storyline revolves around a character named Spooky the Goblin, who is a lovable, funny little green goblin who always seems to get himself into trouble. And quite often the culprits of his mischievous deeds are his neighbors, Farmer and Mrs. Brown. Now, he is invisible, except to little kids. However, if he were to ever to be caught in the act in one of his mischievous deeds, he would be noticed by all, which is why he is careful not to get caught. So I hope you enjoy this little piece of my family history, and I hope that it reignites an interest for you in a type of entertainment that no longer exists today. And hopefully it gives you a taste of nostalgia from days gone by. And so without further ado, making its debut on YouTube is episode 1 of Spooky the Goblin. Batjack Productions presents an audio presentation of That Critter You Just Can't Help But Love. It's the adventures of Spooky the Goblin. He's small and green and funny as can be. But most important of all, he's invisible. Spooky the Goblin was traveling through the woods one day when, by chance, he found an old hollowed-out tree stump. Since he had been traveling for a while, he lay down inside and went to sleep. When he woke, the sun was high in the sky. Spooky observed the scene around him and realized that with a few minor changes, this old stump would make an excellent home. So, he began clearing away the leaves and the twigs, removed all the dead wood, and declared the old stump his newfound home. It was right then and there that Spooky remembered he had not eaten for days. So he decided to go exploring. That's when he discovered his new neighbors. It was a farm with a little house occupied by none other than Mr. and Mrs. Farmer Brown. More than anything, Spooky wanted that pie that Mrs. Brown was making. But when no way could be found to get into the house, he decided to make his way to the barn. Here, Spooky the Goblin observed Farmer Brown busy at work. Just about done, old girl. Well, back for more, huh? Well, here's another squirt. As the cats started drinking, Spooky decided to join them. Well, I best be making my way to the house. Ma probably has breakfast ready by now. Breakfast ready, dear?
Just about. I've got bacon and eggs all ready. Why don't you get washed up while I finish the pancakes?
Sounds good. Be back in a jiffy. While Farmer Brown went to wash up, Spooky the Goblin sneaked into the kitchen table and sat down. Man, I'm starved.
Glad to hear it. I've got a big stack of pancakes just for you.
Say, those look mighty good. Now, it is to be remembered that goblins are not only invisible, they are also mischievous creatures. Somehow, some way, Spooky the Goblin was able to steal those pancakes without being noticed by Farmer and Mrs. Brown. Honey, whatever happened to those pancakes you were getting?
I just gave them to you, sweetie.
What? I haven't seen any pancakes. My plate's empty.
Farmer Brown, you sure are eating more pancakes than usual.
I am not.
Don't tell me that. There was a whole stack of pancakes just for you. They're gone now, and if you're still hungry, you'll have to wait until lunchtime because I'm not making any more.
But I haven't eaten anything yet.
Well, have it your way, Mr. Brown.
Look, I'm not kidding. I haven't had a single bite since we sat down. I've been working hard all morning. I'm hungry, so let's eat.
Look, Mr. Brown, we both know that there were 5 pancakes on this plate. Whatever happened to them is perfectly obvious because there's only 2 of us, and I know I didn't eat any of them.
Ah, fickle. Just because you don't want to make any breakfast doesn't mean I have to starve.
Enough of this, Mr. Brown. You've already had your breakfast, and I think it's time you and I moved on to the rest of the chores. Heaven knows there's a lot of work to be done, and there isn't any time to argue about this.
Well, whatever you say, but if I die of malnutrition, I'm blaming you.
Oh, Mr. Brown, will you stop playing these games and get to work?
All right. Gee, women.
Lunch is at 12:30, Mr. Brown, and I don't want to call you more than once. Don't be late.
What a fine day this is turning out to be. And with that, Spooky was so full of pancakes, syrup, butter, and bacon that he could hardly move. When Farmer Brown went outside, Spooky crawled out the door, walked to his stump, and went to sleep. Spooky the Goblin will return in just a moment. More fun is in store on next week's episode of Spooky the Goblin. It's Christmas time at the Browns, and Mrs. Brown is upset that several things around the farm have come up missing. In time, she becomes suspicious of a prowler on the loose. Is Spooky a part of it? Will she discover the mysterious caper? Find out next week on The Adventures of Spooky the Goblin right here at 8/7 Central. Thanks for joining us for tonight's episode. Spooky the Goblin is a Bat Jack production, written and adapted for radio by Rhett Nelson. Heard in the cast were Rhett Nelson as Farmer Brown, Marcy Nelson as Mrs. Brown, featuring Spooky the Goblin as himself, and Rhett Nelson as your narrator. To learn more about Spooky the Goblin, visit us online at spookythegoblin.com. This is Rhett Nelson speaking. Good night.